Welcome back to another episode of GCC Wisdom. I'm delighted to have our guest today, Kim Skanson, whose career started in tech, Travelers, and Target, and rose to become the president of GBS at Cargill. Today, she's the head of GBS at Cencora, which is a Fortune 10 company with 262 billion in revenues, 46,000 employees in over 50 countries. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you, Kim. Kim, when you look at how GCCs are being set up in the world and think about setting up a new GCC, what in your experience are one or two things you have to get right? And what is the most common mistake that kills that progress in year one?
I think what people have to get right is you have to lay the foundation, and that takes time and it takes thought. And I think that foundation really centers around a culture that puts people first. So when I think of, a GBS, it doesn't matter what company, what industry you're in, where that
Right.
GBS location might be. The foundation is the culture and the people that work there, that they want to be there, that they're going to bring new ideas and work to do great things. And so I think focusing on that culture component is really important. And I think if you try to move too fast and you anchor towards goals of it's this many people by this date, or you're trying to, you miss that foundational piece and you don't get the culture right. I think that can really hinder momentum. It maybe doesn't kill it, but it will slow it down. So I think my advice always to people is put people first and think about the culture you're trying to build.
Good point. So when you reflect on that journey and you think about the last 18 to 24 months, and you think about the things that leaders actually understand, but they haven't really operationalized it yet, what would some of that be?
I think the world around us continues to evolve, right? GBS has been around for, I always tell people, it's been around for 40 years plus. It meant, many decades that have proven that this is an operational model that can work for, again, regardless of industry, regardless of size, this can work. And I think the shift people need to keep thinking about is the world around you is changing. Business needs are evolving. Pace is happening quicker. I think there's a higher expectation in what GBS can provide. And so I think that shift in me selfishly, I'm in a startup mode. So I've been in at a company that's building it from scratch. And so my shift in the last 18 to 24 months has really been, it's more than just where you're putting work, right? We have to get to capability and scale, and we have to think about how you care and feed an asset of a capability more holistically, where
Yeah.
you're not just worrying about how it's performed, but you're also worrying about how you're innovating against that business process and making it, differentiate itself from your competitors. So I think that's a little bit of a mind shift. GBS can be the backbone for there, can be a strategic thought partner, and we have to shift how we work as a result.
Yeah. So on that note, Kim, you've done it before, and now you're doing something, you've done something from scratch. What enterprise value are you trying to make sure is driven through this GBS that the boards really care about and not just efficiency metrics?
Of course, the board and any customers or consumers of services in a GBS are going to want to make sure that the quality of the delivery is happening, right? So that we're hitting those efficiency metrics, we're hitting those service level agreements. That's all, I think, foundational. Again, those things have to exist. I think
Right.
when I start to see, like, how do you differentiate or how do you get some, measurable enterprise value, it's around the pipeline of the future. Back to that talent component, that culture component I mentioned. I think if you see this as kind of, talent you're bringing into the organization to really think around always thinking about kind of driving that efficiency and customer experience forward in new ways. But it's that pipeline of future talent where I think, again, if the culture's built right, you bring this innovation kind of mindset that I think kind of really differentiates. It's not just a place that work happens. It's like the future of how the organization's going to run. And that's a different way to think about it. And if I'm a board member and I sit on a few, those are the things I think you have to challenge organizations to push upon.
Yeah. I think, Kim, one of the things that I don't hear enough talked about is how leaders like you are shaping experience, whether it's the customer experience, whether it's the employee experience in your GBS, and not just about efficiency metrics for sure.
Yeah.
Hey, so one of the topic that comes up, I think, in every board conversation, in every customer conversation is How are you seeing AI shape outcomes where it's not just experimentation, but actually shaping outcomes?
You're talking to a former technologist, right? So I grew up as an IT engineer, and so for me, AI and the next big thing in technology has always been there, right? So I can remember working in retail when RFID technology was the next big thing, and we thought we had to put an RFID tag on every item in every store, and that didn't make sense. And so to me, it's always a balance with the new technology in the innovation of technology. We know it's always going to exist and continue to change, and it evolves how we think in our personal lives and our professional lives. And I think AI is changing outcomes, that it's more readily available. People are getting more comfortable using it. I think the key is you have to look at the right use cases for how you want to leverage it within an organization. I think sometimes we want to swing those pendulums really far one way
Yeah.
or the other. And I think sometimes I think mistakes can be made when that pendulum is swung too far and too much dependence is put there. So for me, it's about what are the right use cases, what makes sense, what doesn't, what's the impact, how do you measure the value you're getting out there, and how do you integrate it? It's not one or the other. It's an integrated approach to how do you leverage AI with the existing teams and structures that are working well, and how do you take it to the next level to drive value for the organization. But to me, it isn't I think sometimes I would never say personally that I think AI is going to it's going to continue to evolve and change, but it's not going to replace the need
Yeah.
for the GBS backbone in organizations.
Yeah, I think the key point that I reinforce is this, what business problem are you solving and what value are you driving? And is that at scale that justifies the use case for sure? So, Kim, if a GBS leader were starting today, or when you take on a new role, very clearly, you said before, culture you've got to focus on because that drives everything. What are some of the other one or two decisions you must get right when you start kind of a new GBS role?
I think you really have to get that internal buy-in, the why you're doing this. So I've stood up GBSs somewhat from scratch, in my last two forays on this, and I would say that buy-in has to be there. The why. You never can assume, that stakeholder even remember conversations you've had, that they continue to remember what that is, right? So this is new
Yeah,
to a lot of people, or if they don't have experience with it, it can be scary. It can be a little bit, there's
right.
this unsureness to it, if that makes sense. So I think don't underestimate the importance to maintain that buy-in, anchor back to the why constantly. If you get off track on that, I think it's not irreversible, but it's
Yeah,
hard to recover quickly from it. It takes you a few steps backwards. So I think, buy-in, stakeholder management, engagement is key. And, then I think also a little bit around, where you want to do this, how are you going to do this? What's your core, principles around location? Is it where you want to be in the world? What are the type of work you
yeah,
want to be there? Be really thoughtful about that. Again, should tie to the why, right? Why
yeah,
you're doing this. You're trying to drive value, trying to, get centralization at a capability at scale. Like, what are the whys behind that? But kind of those key decisions about the type of work, where you're going to have that work happen. What's your
yeah,
operating model, structures, I think are key.
yeah.
I mean, the list is long. I could keep talking
Yeah,
about
I
it. The
know.
reality is keep that buy-in. And if there's one
Yeah.
thing to think about is maintain you keep that buy-in.
Yeah, I was just going through my mental checklist as you were talking about those, but a key point is don't underestimate buy-in. And I'm assuming Kim is just not just one and done. This is a process that continues, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So Kim, let's end by talking about your book, The Attitude Advantage, Positive Perspectives. Talk a little bit about what compelled you to write the book and what is one takeaway that GBS leaders should have from it.
So I did just recently publish a book, and what inspired me to write it is I do a lot of mentoring. I've learned a lot in my career, and I have a lot of stories that I wish I would have known when I was in my 20s that I know now, that I learned through experience or trial and error or mistakes I've made. And so the idea of the book just, I wouldn't even say it's a goal. It just kind of came to be. So I wrote a book. It has a lot of stories, but the whole theme is around, the timeless perspective about maintaining a positive attitude. And, I tell a little family history in there too around, kind of where my roots came from and how I saw people in my family tree that emulated a lot of positivity in much more difficult times than I have seen. But I think that's something we can take with us personally and professionally. So as a GBS leader, what can you benefit from it? Right? Kind of that confidence to persevere. Because sometimes what we do isn't always easy. We're driving change in organization. With change comes angst. With change comes, a lot of different emotion. And so I think sometimes it helps us to remind, even those days that might feel a little harder, we might have to take a step backwards to move forwards. It's around kind of maintaining that positive outlook and keeping your eye on the horizon, because that's where good things come to life.
On that note, to the audience, let me leave you with maintain a positive attitude. Kim, thank you so much for making time for us today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Be well all.
Thank you. So that was really it.
All right.
I think we did it. Yeah, we did it under 10 minutes. I think it's awesome. Kim, thank you so much for making time. Look,
Yeah.
I started the GBS board because I thought people should learn from each other, right? So I'm very passionate about that. And to me, this is another one piece where, you guys have so much knowledge, so much experience. Let's figure out ways to share it. And when you give time, I know everybody really, really appreciates it.
Yeah, no, we all help each other, right? So it's important to do we all need to do that, right? It's the way the world
Yeah.
works.
Yeah. How are you doing otherwise with all your travel schedule and everything else
Yeah,
going on?
good. It's been interesting just the last couple of weeks with a lot of the events of the